the rematch that we've all been waiting for. Ohio State, Oregon going at the Rose Bowl, one of the best venues in all of college football, and quite frankly, where they should be playing the national championship every year. But I digress. We look at the Ohio State and Oregon here. Great rematch coming into the college football playoff. And this seems like a very different type of matchup for me. And what I mean by a different type of matchup is I think Ohio State versus Oregon game one was a lot more explosive in the sense that Will Howard and Dylan Gabriel both balled out. They really didn't make too many mistakes. Even watching Will Howard versus Tennessee, he put on a absolute clinic. And if anybody was doubting him before that game, put on the highlight film in that first quarter and just watching him just straight up just cook that defense. It was incredible to watch. And then when you have Dylan Gabriel too, one of the most experienced college football quarterbacks of all time, 60 plus touchdown passes, and he is just the absolute pillar in terms of consistency, in terms of poise, and just in terms of his leadership too, which is going to be on full display this season. And the Ducks, obviously one of the most highly productive offenses of all of college football. But I think what we can learn about Oregon versus Penn State in the Big Ten championship game, and also what we've learned about Ohio State versus Michigan and their matchup versus Tennessee and all of that too, is I think this game is going to come down much more to how much Ohio State can run the ball. And I know all of the hype is surrounded by Jeremiah Smith, by Nagupa, and that wide receiving core, who, by the way, is incredible to watch and so talented. And it's definitely gonna create a little bit of a matchup issue for Oregon. Can they stop them enough to be able to hold on here? Because I think too, you look at the ticker there, they're 12th in scoring defense and 9th in the entire country on defense. So I mean, it's not so much that the secondary has necessarily been bad, but I'd say much like Ohio State, there's been bits and pieces where both their secondaries have been inconsistent. And I think Will Howard and Dylan Gabriel can both exploit that. And I think we will see that a little bit. However, I think what changes about this game is, to me, this game seems much more of a bend, don't break type game. Whereas I don't think we're going to see as many explosive plays. I don't think it's going to be nearly as high scoring. I think a lot of it is just going to be coming down to who wins in that trench battle and which running backs can get going quicker. Because if Ohio State wants to win this game, Henderson and Junkins need to be able to go. They had one of the most frustrating games of the entire year against game one versus the Ducks, and Ohio State's not going to let that happen again. You sit there and you watch the amount of success that Penn State had versus Oregon running the ball. Nick Singleton and Allen, they both had over 100 yards rushing in that game, and you have to imagine that Chip Kelly's going to try to emulate that. And even in terms of the storyline for Chip Kelly, he coached in Pasadena, California for 5 or 6 seasons. He was the offensive coordinator at Oregon and was the head coach there for 4 seasons too. So that's going to be just as much of a storyline too. It's going to be a coming home story for Chip Kelly, and I have to imagine he's going to get some boos there. So I'm intrigued by that matchup because in many ways it's essentially a home game for Oregon. I'm going to imagine that the crowd there is always electric. It's always incredible to see as a fan. But I'm curious in terms of what the Ohio State crowd is going to be like there. I think Ohio State fans, yes, you get Ohio State fans all throughout the country and all that too. But Oregon's different, and Dan Lanning in this team is hot right now. And what makes me reluctant to go all the way with Ohio State is just how fundamentally sound Oregon is in all bases of the field. However, when you look at Oregon, I talked about the secondary a little bit ago. I talked about some of the vulnerabilities that they have running the ball. But at the same time, when you have guys like Tez Johnson, who is an absolute playmaker and a stud and knows how to extend the field, it makes you second guess the entire thing. So when you sit there and say to yourself, you have 2 quarterbacks who who both know how to air it out. You have solid offensive lines all around. I think Ohio State does deserve a lot of credit for some of the advances that they've made on the offensive line. I know that they're banged up in a couple places. That's going to be another storyline. Can Ohio State's offensive line protect Will Howard enough to be able to get be able to get Will Howard in a rhythm? I don't think necessarily they need to block so much to the point where they're going to go deep on every play. I don't think that. I think they just have to be good enough to be able to get into a rhythm. And most importantly, can they create enough lanes for Henderson and Jenkins and Junkins to actually play a bigger role in this game? Because if you ask me who's the biggest X factor in this game, I would say it's going to be Ohio State's running backs and it's going to be Tej Johnson. Those for me those three for me are going to be the difference of who wins this game. And I know I talked a couple seconds ago about how I don't think it's going to be as high scoring a game or it's not going to be as explosive. But when you look at this game, both of them really need it for two different reasons. Because Ryan Day is at the point now where fans are starting to get pissed off with them if they don't win a national title this year, given that they have the most talented roster in the entire country. The expectations have been there so consistently. However, it just seems like there's one game short every time. And you have to ask yourself too, if whoever wins Ohio State Oregon plays the winner will presumably play the winner of Texas and Arizona State. That's what at least seems like to me in terms of who plays in the Cotton Bowl. But when you look at this full circle too, another thing that I think is worth mentioning, I talked about Chip Kelly a couple seconds ago. I talked about Will Howard, but I think the secondary has got to be another big storyline here. And the trenches are obviously that's a storyline that everybody's gonna talk about. Who wins those 3rd and 2s, those 3rd and 3s, who can extend drives. I don't think you're going to see too much sloppy play here with teams that are both relatively experienced football teams. Jim Knowles is an incredible defensive coordinator, and he's already said in the pregame interviews just how explosive Oregon is, how much he respects Will Stein being an offensive coordinator, and I think quite frankly he's going to be a head coach sooner than later too. So when you look at these coaching staffs, you just sit there and say, man, this is going to be a really fun matchup, and it just feels like such a different energy than what it is last time because there's so much more at stake this time, and it just feels like that Dan Lanning and Ryan Day are both on the cusp of something special. But the more you look at this, the more I say to myself, I don't think this is going to be the high scoring thriller game that we see last time. I see this as more of a kind of a 24-21 game. I think the defenses are going to get some more stops than usual. I don't really see Ohio State or Oregon really trying to pressure too much. I don't think we're going to see a lot of blitzes. I think we might see some disguises in coverage. I think we might see maybe someone try to get flustered early. Because when I sit there and say to myself, who wins this game? I think it's going to be two things. I think it's going to be one, who runs the ball better, but two, who gets the momentum early. Because to me, what Ohio State and Oregon both have in common is once when they put their foot on the gas and once they have a really big start to a game, they don't let up. So to me, if you sit there and say to yourself, who's going to win this game? I think those are the two biggest things that comes down to. Because Ohio State does have more weaknesses in the sense of the secondary isn't as consistent. You do worry about the offensive line a little bit. However, Chip Kelly has proved last week in this team versus Tennessee that they can be explosive when they want to be. They absolutely just bullied people in terms of the offensive line, and it seems like they're taking a step in the right direction here. But in terms of this game, it almost feels like it is Ohio State's time to be able to avenge the Big Ten championship, not avenge the Big Ten championship, avenge the first loss from before, and be able to move on. But right now, my gut just tells me that Oregon's just going to squeak by here. I think as this game progresses, I think we're going to see more vulnerabilities coming out of Oregon. Do we know specifically what yet? Not necessarily, but at the same time, Oregon and Ohio State both have such great wide receiving cores that they both have to be respected. But At the same time, I just think Oregon right now is a simply more talented team, and they are more set up for success in terms of making a long-term run. So give me Oregon over Ohio State. I'll go on a limb and say it's going to be 27-24.